So any other questions before we get started? No? Okay, good. What they talked about Wednesday, which I think came through, was the importance of place to the Roosevelts. The importance of, we all have those places in our lives. All of you could think back to a time in your lives of an important place, and it meant something to you. There's a memory associated with it, whether it's a church or the first house you remember, or the house you grew up in later on, or a place you lived in school, or your first house after school, whatever. Place has an association with this. And I know a lot of us have been sitting around during the last couple of weeks, I think, and being a little reflective, because our world has changed, and you check in with people, see how they're doing. And sometimes they're people from long ago. I've checked in with people I haven't talked with in 50 years. Hey, how are you? I'm like, oh, well, it takes a crisis sometimes to make us do that. But I've been thinking about where I grew up and those memories associated with that, and that's always kind of fun. But the Roosevelts have a sense of place, and as we know, Campobello was a unique place. And the reason they do all that Eleanor stuff is that's what she believed was her real home. Because Sarah didn't get up there very much after they went up there. She came up on occasion, but she would come up after Eleanor had been there for a while. And so she regarded it as her first real home with Franklin. I think that's special. I love the picture that Will showed of all of them on the front porch. And everybody looks so dour and serious, but I never notice that Sarah's hand is on Eleanor's knee. And I think even relationships like that are fraught with difficulty sometimes, there's moments that you kind of find some common ground. And I think Mama was a little upset with her boy and what he had done, and was trying to support her daughter-in-law in a time of grief, which I think is pretty telling, I think. It's what people do often behind the scenes. It's more indicative of how they are when they're out in public and performing, quote unquote. An example, JFK, when he and Jackie had that baby boy in the late summer of '63, and the baby was in the hospital and it was struggling to live, and the president was pacing up and down the hallways at night, and he passed the nursery, and there was a baby in the nursery who'd been burned. And he asked for the mother's name, and he wrote a note to the mother, said, "Keep your courage up, Jack Kennedy," and gave it to a nurse that please deliver. Never said anything to the press. Certain people would make sure there was a press conference involved with that. But what they do when no one's watching, and I think that picture is indicative of, Sarah's the grand matriarch of the family, and we all know her relationship with Franklin's very strong, but her quiet support of Eleanor, I think, was very telling in that picture. And that it was taken at Campobello, I think, is even more important to the story. And again, when this is all done, we'll organize some kind of road trip, and a bunch of us will go up. We'll have Crocker lead the way in his motorcycle, and we'll go up to Campobello. Make sure your passports are all set. You have to have those by October to fly anyway. You have to have everything updated, so get on the ball. So let's talk about, you all got your flyers, right, from Eleanor and Franklin locations. I thought those were great. I love the quality that the National Park Service has on those brochures. I've got a box of these from different places, and they're all the same, and they're really quite well done. Well, let's talk about Hyde Park, because I think that's where the story begins, and that is where Franklin believed that was his place. To Eleanor, Campobello was her home. Franklin, Hyde Park was his home. He was once quoted as having said, "All that is within me cries out to go back to my home on the Hudson." If you've ever been there, you know why. Just from a point of what it looked like, what it looks like. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. We were there last fall. I'll show you a couple pictures of it. I'll put on the virtual background. I'll change this, and I'll slip out of the way so you all can see. I got to change that so it's the right way. There you go. That is the home the house is called Springwood. That is not the original home. The original home was much smaller. When they made that movie, Eleanor and Franklin, and they're at Hyde Park, it's actually, they're standing in front of this Hyde Park because the house that Franklin knew when he and Eleanor met was not that house. It was enlarged a great deal after they got married. But that's what it is today. They also have the, look at it this way. That's the presidential library. That's on the grounds. Franklin's was the first presidential library to be built. He actually gave the dedication speech. I think it's funny because it's a very small presidential library. JFK's library is about 8 times as big, and he was only president for 1,000 days. FDR was president for 12 years, and his is very small. If they were just concise in keeping documents, or they organized it well, I don't know, but it's different. Also, this is one of the cottages, Eleanor's cottages at Valkill. In the wintertime. And let's see, the Roosevelts are buried there. This is the garden at Springwood. Fala is also buried there. And you'll recognize that if you looked at pictures of when FDR was buried or when Eleanor was buried. When Eleanor was buried, President Eisenhower, President Truman, President Kennedy, and President Johnson were all there. And I think we did this. This is Franklin, the main living room at Springwood. The house is each room's kind of different. If you get a chance, go online and look at some of the photographs. I'm sure they're out there of the house, because they're very different. Very ornate. You have a dark paneled room like his office, his library, where he did reading and stamp collecting. And then you go to the living room, which is heavy, thick drapes and wallpaper and ornate gold and stuff. Very Victorian. You can tell whose rooms are kind of whose rooms. You can tell where Sarah kind of holds court, because she's kind of the old school Victorian, really overdone rooms. And then Franklin's is this beautiful library. They put in an elevator at one point, a small lift for him, so you can get around. And it's ironic to go in and see the house and to stand in the front foyer and look at the stairs to your right and realize those are the stairs that he practiced pulling himself up and down to get away from fire. It looks exactly as it did last time he was there. I'm still going to try and get a hold of the folks there to see if they can give us a tour, but I haven't heard from them in 2 weeks, so I don't know what they're up to. But the house was purchased. They were purchased by his father. It goes back to that whole country squire attitude they had. This is that you're supposed to live on this great estate and enjoy your life and not work too hard and ride to the hounds and pretend you're an Englishman. One of the things that's different when you go there now is you look down at the river, and a lot of the lowland forest has grown up, and you can't really see the river from the house much anymore. But in Franklin's day, they looked like they were right on the river. And that he's got acres and acres and acres of playground. I mean, what an amazing place to live and grow up. I think I mentioned before the story of the day his parents gave him 1 day to do whatever he wanted. He didn't have to apologize for anything or tell them what he did. He didn't have to go anywhere. You could be gone for a whole day on that property and never see another person, which I think is absolutely amazing and beautiful. But it's where he grew up. One of the reasons they think that he was susceptible to diseases as he grew up is he was so isolated at Hyde Park. He didn't get out and see other people. He didn't go into town very much. He stayed at the house. And part of what, kids need to be exposed to germs so that when real germs come along, they're ready for it. But Franklin wasn't. He was kept at home by his mother, not allowed to dress in boys' clothes, I think, until he was 5. Very Victorian attitude. Little ringlets and pantaloons and things like that was considered normal. But I think at Hyde Park also is the genesis of his interest in the outdoors, because he had such a playground to play in, because he could go out and observe the birds. He studied birds by the hundreds, just like Teddy used to do. But Teddy had to do his in the city. Franklin got to do his up in the country. He stuffed birds. He read. He probably canoed the river. He climbed trees. He went out and watched people work on his father's farm. I think it's just an idyllic way to grow up in some ways. You don't have to go looking into the danger of going into town. You can kind of be there in your own place to be able to do this. I think that's amazing. It was a place he brought people to. You go to the White House to intimidate people. People come to the Oval Office. I don't care who it is, what your job is, what you've done. That whole office is designed to intimidate the hell out of you. Franklin's place at Hyde Park is designed to kind of give you a sense of him I think, at the same time, as well as intimidate you. There's a reason they brought the King and Queen of England to Hyde Park. There's an okay movie out a few years ago called Hyde Park on Hudson, starring Bill Murray as FDR. It concerns the royals coming before the war to Hyde Park. One of my favorite things about Roosevelt is his ability to kind of level the playing field. We've talked about before, he's very patrician, very much a gentleman and kind of a Thurston Howell III kind of person. But after polio, his whole view changed. He was much more leveled with people now. They were him. He was them. He didn't think of himself as being better than them because he'd suffered something and he couldn't do things on his own now. He had to have help. And that changed how his whole view was. One of my favorite stories is, in regard to that, is when the King and Queen came, they came up via train to Hyde Park from the city. Again, designed to give them a little flavor of America, what America's all about. See some of the towns. And it's what a place to drive or take the train up from New York to Hyde Park. Some of the most beautiful country in the world is along the Hudson River. And they get to Hyde Park, and the president's there, all the bands and everything, and he's standing there waiting for them to get off the train. And they get off the train, and you're supposed to bow or whatever you're supposed to do. And not FDR. He sticks his hand out to the king and says, "Hiya, George." I think the king probably went, uh-huh. So I don't think it's surprising when Queen Elizabeth deals with American presidents, as she has for 60 plus years. She's not surprised that they let their guard down a little bit, because her dad had that happen to him when he was King of England, that the president says, "Hi, how are you? What's up?" And then they went from there. And just near the house at Valkill that Eleanor had, there was a place that Franklin was building even further away than that called Top Cottage. And that's where they took them. And does anyone remember what they had for lunch that day? Hot dogs. I mean, you're the King of England. People can't walk in the room without bowing to you. They food test. You have to have everything's ornately put together on a plate. And I'm sure even your breakfast cereal has some ganache on it, whatever. And they're having hot dogs. They had to be like, "What the hell?" I said, "What are we eating here?" "I don't know, Georgie. Let's eat them." I don't think if they're the red hot dogs from Maine, that would have freaked them out. They should bring them to Maine next time, and have, what do they call those? Red, I don't know what they're called. Unmute yourself there again. Ellen's got you.
They're called snappers, and the red hot dogs and Moxie is what they have. Yeah. Wouldn't
that be good?
Yeah.
Elizabeth should come over and do that before she goes. That'd be sure her bucket list become to have snappers and Moxie. And a couple stories from Gary Crocker. That might either cause her to love us more or flee. We don't know. But you can sense from the brochure just how big the estate is. What they've put in there. There's other small dwellings. There's the library. You can see what it was like for him to grow up there. Peter Rosenberg, who's in the Monday class, grew up in Poughkeepsie, New York, just a few miles away. And he remembered his mother told the story of going into town one day into Poughkeepsie, and there was Eleanor with the dog, Fala. And his mom had her dog, and they got into a bit of a tussle. So Scotty is not exactly quiet and docile puppies. And I'm sure Fallon knew he was pretty important. You have to go there to really appreciate it, but it's just this beautiful place. But the Roosevelts were also very active in keeping the place. It was a working farm. There were people living on the land that ran the farm for them. James went around and spoke to people all the time. They're very much a part of society there in that sense. Here's a picture of Franklin's bird collection. Am I getting that in the right place? I go, there we go. See that? There we go. Very much like Uncle Teddy. He collected stamps. But his father and then Franklin would go out with him, and they'd meet the people that worked the land. They kept track. This wonderful book that I have that I got there last, I got this backwards. There we go. FDR and his Hyde Park neighbors. They've got appendixes in here of the list of employees and their jobs. You know, you've got Mr. Mingo's a butler. You've got Mr. Monk, who works on the farm. Mrs. Muller works for ER. There's a laborer, a butler, a kitchen maid, a laundress, a cook, a garden, a domestic, a nurse, someone in charge of the grounds, someone in charge as a coachman, a chauffeur. I mean, they employed a lot of people. And Franklin got to know most of them. And his father, they called his father Mr. James, which is almost has a patronizing sense to it, but he was well regarded by the people who lived there. But they kept track of everything they did. And this book is a wonderful example of, there's a record in here of what it cost to go to the farm in 1923 to buy things from nails to powders to stamps to axe handles, just all sorts of, and they kept track of it in this book. It's really fascinating to read what it's like to see how the Roosevelts really ran. It wasn't just a place that just sat there. They used it. They worked it. They were part of the community. When Franklin was president, he was very involved in like local historical societies. He was president for a while of that. He would write people and say, hey, what about this? I think if you put the president on your historical society, you think, oh, he's never going to be involved. Not FDR. He's writing letters and calling people all the time about, well, I think my ancestors did this. What about your ancestors? I'm very involved with that sort of thing. He went there a lot as president. Like I said, he had the King and Queen of England there for a meeting. And it was a place, though, that it was Sarah's house because Sarah had been married to Franklin's father. And when he passed away, it was her house. And so she controlled a lot of what happened. Remember, we talked about she controlled Franklin's purse strings till the end of her life. So it wasn't really his house. It was kind of like her house. We loved to go there. He was born there. Campobello is kind of Eleanor's place. But Hyde Park was the place he went to. And they started branching out. Just a few miles from the estate at Hyde Park is the Eleanor Roosevelt at Valkill. And the brochure that they put out for that is absolutely amazing, too. Back in the day, they used to have just like a regular map. And now they do these 3D computer-generated maps of what the places look like. And I think that really helps you get a sense. If you never go there, you can almost feel like you've been there if you've looked at these maps. So she had a swimming pool, a tennis court. And Valkill was designed as a social experiment between her and she and some of her friends. Marion Dickerman, Lorena Hickok, Nancy Cook. And they built furniture there for a while and tried to sell it and be part of the local community in that. But it became Eleanor's getaway. It became a place that the president would go if he called and asked if he could come over. But it was her place to go away, to get away from everybody, get away from Franklin, from the kids, from Mama, from politics, and spend time with her friends. We'll talk more about the relationship with these friends down the road, but it's a unique setup, to have be like, Gary having his own place down the road from Ellen. Why would you do that? But, some people have the money and time to do that, and they need to do that. She needed to be her own person. She needed to be the place to get away with people who thought like her, who spoke like her, who did things she did. And I think it's an important place in that fact. But I think it's fascinating. There are pictures of Franklin there. He was always welcome. So this isn't a place that she had built and done to keep him away. Some people kind of go, oh, she built this place because she hated his guts and she needed her own place. That's not true. He was there a lot. The women that Eleanor associated with at this time loved Franklin. And they knew he was the best chance for them to get any of their views that they had about stuff, society. Hoover's not going to listen to them. Coolidge isn't listening to them. Franklin Roosevelt might listen to them. So there's that aspect of it. But I think they enjoyed each other's company. He never overstayed his welcome. He would go back and to Hyde Park. But it was her place. And I love the fact that that's open for visitors as well. This is the place in 1960. John F. Kennedy was just the Democratic nominee for president. Eleanor Roosevelt was known to be not a big supporter of his, primarily because of his father, old Joe Kennedy, who had been a Roosevelt associate for years. And he had fallen out with FDR and was more conservative than FDR. But after Jack got the nomination, Eleanor still hadn't come around to him, so he offered to come visit her and talk to her. And he made an appointment to go up. I think it was September of 1960. And the day before he was to arrive, her granddaughter died in a horse accident. And she insisted he come anyway. And that kind of graciousness, I think the Kennedy was like, wow, this woman's just lost her granddaughter, and she still wants to sit down with me. They sat down for an hour or two. They talked. There's some great photographs. Go look on the line about that. He was enthralled. He came out of that meeting, as he said, a little bit in love with her. There was something about her that was so compelling and so smart and so charming that he was kind of wowed by her. And she wholeheartedly endorsed him after that. But that's where she went after President Roosevelt died. That's where she was when they asked her to be charter member of the UN. And that's where she went often in her later years to spend time with her friends and her family. So I think it's amazing that her husband will allow her to have her own, this is the ultimate she shed, as we call them. It's multiple homes. And it's a social experiment that didn't really go really well. The furniture never really took off. But it becomes her refuge, her place to get away. War that we had, all of us had that kind of money, we could build up our own. If, we could, each person in your family could have their own house on the same property. It's kind of like the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport, but they're all within shouting distance of each other. To have your place 2 miles down the road to get away was, I think, a godsend for her, to get away from all the hustle and bustle of Franklin's career, being governor, being president. So I think it's a really wonderful place. The next time I have not yet been to Valkill, I want to go there next time to see this place. And I want to go to Top Cottage, which is a small place he was building with his cousin Daisy Stuckley, even further away than Eleanor's place. To get away. I can imagine the pressure of being the president of the United States must be immense. And to be able to find a place to rejuvenate, to rethink, to relax. When FDR would get away on his mini vacations like that, when he was sick towards the end of his life, people could tell that a week at Hyde Park, or a week at Campobello, or a week at Warm Springs really did a lot for him. It brought him back from the edge of the cliff, so to speak. So I think in that sense, Hyde Park is a wonderful place for him. They got a fantastic museum. If you go to any place to understand FDR, that's the place to go. Campobello is fantastic, but Franklin's born here, buried there. Absolutely a beautiful place. If you get a chance, it's not that far, and the scenery on Hudson River, especially in the fall, is unbelievable. And it still has that small town charm. It hasn't changed much since Franklin was there. There's a few things like the Roosevelt Hotel, things like that, try to make a buck, but I can't blame them for doing that. Top of the state-of-the-art dynamic museum exhibits, great staff. So be aware of that. Doesn't matter right now anyway, but the next couple months the house is closed. They're doing some renovations, making sure things are up to snuff. I'll still see if I can get the folks at the FDR house in Hyde Park to give us a tour via Zoom like I did with Will. So any other questions about the Roosevelts? Are also very much involved in the church there in Hyde Park. They were both on the vestry. One of the things I love in this book is there's a chart of all the election results. Franklin didn't do very well in his hometown. It's very Republican. It's not like unlike the Kennedys in Hyannisport, very Republican. He did win his 2 Senate races there, but after that, he kind of gets beat all the time. He got 9,000 votes in 1920 in Hyde Park, in that part in Dutchess County, for vice president, but the Harding and Coolidge ticket got 16,000. He was able to pull out popular votes there for governor, and he struggled a little bit as president to kind of sometimes. One of the things he would do after the elections, he would have ready to the house for a party. There's some great photographs of Franklin on the porch at Hyde Park. It started in 1920. There's some great photographs of him addressing the crowd, and he loved it because people came to see him, people came to listen to him, have some big political gathering. The person who hated it the most was Mama. Because now you have like 5,000 people wrecking her lawn and walking into her garden and traipsing around the house and the property. And that turns into a thing for Franklin every year. He would have, every time they have an election, they would have people there to kind of cheer him on. The last, you can see in pictures of him in 1944 how sick he is, how thin he is, how unwell he looks. But he's smiling because all his neighbors have come to see him at the house, and that makes all the difference in the world to him. If I ran for office and I had 5,000 people in my yard, my wife would kill me. I couldn't get 5,000 people in my yard, but things get wrecked when that happens, right? So that's the way it goes. So they're very involved all through his presidency in Hyde Park and in the town and the running of the house. He goes there to get away. It's a wonderful place for them to rejuvenate. Eleanor has her own place. Franklin has his other own place. But it's really a unique opportunity to kind of see the Roosevelts. I think you get a sense of that from the brochures, what life was like for them. And there are, any books you can get on the Roosevelts, they're all going to talk about Hyde Park and its role in his life. Matter of fact, their son, Eleanor Roosevelt, one of his books is called The Roosevelts of Hyde Park, because that's a big part of his life. So, any questions about anything about Hyde Park?
Yes, Mike, I have one question.
Yeah.
Just about Sarah. So tell us how long she lived.
She lived till just before World War II broke out with Pearl Harbor. When the president signed the Declaration of War, he's wearing a black armband in memory of his mother.
Okay, so she was quite elderly then when she passed.
I'll double check that, but yeah, she was in her late 80s.
Wow.
See if I can find the picture. It was at the. I should have gotten all the library books on the Roosevelts I could, because now I can't go back. I'd have to hang on to them for months and months and months. But she died in September, 2 months before Pearl Harbor, 3 months before Pearl Harbor.
Okay.
And she was 80.
No.
80. Where's her age? She made the top cover of Time magazine once.
Really?
86 when she died.
Wow.
And I'll find sometime next week. There's a picture from one of these books. It's a photograph of Franklin and Sarah taken from roughly the same angle.
Mm-hmm.
They're identical. He looks so much like his mother. It's not even funny. So, but that was Hyde Park is her place, right? She never gave up title to it. Franklin lived there when he could, but it was her estate, her land, her husband's land, and so therefore for him it wasn't. He loved it, but there's always that nagging little bit of it's not quite my home because my mom's going to be there. And Eleanor loved Campobello because it was far enough away that Sarah didn't go there very much. And I love the fact that Eleanor kept going back to Campobello more than Franklin did. But the place he discovers in the midst of all the polio that becomes a really important place to him is Warm Springs.
Right.
We'll talk about that next. Any other questions?
I'm in the middle of it, actually, of a...
Gary's on the phone. No, you're good. You're good. You're good. So, in the midst of polio and trying to understand Frank's recovery from that, we also have to understand the importance of place in that. He can't get around anymore. He's stuck. He can't get around anymore. He has to rely on people. And in the process of recovering from polio and understanding what his life was going to be like and seeking out new cures, he heard about this place in Georgia. It's about an hour southwest of Atlanta. So you can get there easy now. But remember, we talked about last week when he had the polio, he heard about this place, this old kind of rundown spa place with mineral spring water that the water was 90 degrees plus and allowed him to feel like he was walking in the pool, like he was recovering somewhat. Although he never really gained any real muscle tone in his legs, he felt like he had when he was in the pool at Warm Springs. But when he first went there, it was kind of run down. It was kind of a place that people had gone to get away from their Maine winters or Massachusetts, whatever you want to go south. And he went there the first time, felt the experience with the waters, kept going back. One of the things that Franklin really can't, he can't stand the appearance of the place when he first goes there. It's going to run down and decrepit. So eventually he becomes so enamored of it and so in touch with it that he buys it. We've talked about that before. That's in the movie Warm Springs. He bought the place. He sunk all his money into this place. So he had a place to go and a place to escape, a place to work on his physical well-being and mental well-being and spiritual well-being. That's really hard to get to after a while. I mean, it's a great place to have a presidential retreat. If you go to other presidential retreats, they're somewhat easily accessible. But Warm Springs is way down the woods of Georgia. You got to be pretty intrepid to go find the guy. Eventually, it works out that people know where he is at because he's the president, and that's what you do. But he establishes the polio rehabilitation clinic there that's still in business today. It's a much different town. Remember we talked about the town that the resort is located in is called Bullockville. Bulloch, Bullockville. His Uncle Teddy's mother's from that town. The Bullocks. So there's a Roosevelt connection to Bullockville way before FDR shows up. That's where, and I thought it was interesting they didn't mention that in that movie Warm Springs, because that to me is kind of one of those things about history where you kind of see, oh, that's why he went there. That's why he's there. So that I think is fascinating to think about too. It's not unlike those of you who took the Beatles class with me a couple years ago. Strawberry Fields in Liverpool, the building that's part of the Salvation Army grounds that John sang about in the song. That building looks almost identical to the Dakota apartment buildings in New York where he lived and died. And I think place, again, is important. Childhood memories, you can get all your childhood memories by the building that looks like you used to know where you live now. So your family connection to Bullockville, there had to be a reason, like, oh, cool, that's Uncle Teddy. Another connection to Teddy that he's always trying to perpetuate. Of course, the town now is called Warm Springs. It's much bigger than it was then. Let me show you the some pictures from Warm Springs. This is downtown Warm Springs. Looks like a lot of small towns in Maine or any other place you go, right? Nothing fancy schmancy. This is the cottage that the president eventually has built in Warm Springs. This is what is known as the Little White House. Nothing fancy, but it's got a very comfortable inside. Here's a view at the back porch. The pine forests of northern Georgia. It looks like a camp inside. I mean, there's you go. There's a camp. Keep you right at home any place in Maine. Pine walls, wood. You know, it looks like a place I grew up in Minnesota. This is the pool. Clearly not being used. That this must be some off-season time. I didn't know that. And then they made that movie Warm Springs. That they actually filmed at the actual pool. This pool right here. So those, if you watch video of Franklin as president, you see a lot of times it's he's swimming in that pool. Here is Franklin the day before he died in his living room with his little White House. See a special seating thing. His legs are up on that kind of ottoman there. He's doing some work. And this is that same place inside the house today. This is where he was sitting on April 12th, 1945. He was getting ready for lunch. He had posed for Madame Schumantoff for a while, was doing some paperwork. And he said, I have a terrific pain in the back of my head, and collapsed. And I took him to his bedroom, which is just off the back. And that's where he died a few hours later. But I need to go to Warm Springs sometime. I mean, this is, when you go to places where these people have, and they've left him, right, like he's also, he left the room. I mean, that's just amazing to me. So, not a very big place, but Franklin didn't need to be ostentatious. He just needed to get away. The warm weather in Georgia was helpful for him. Oftentimes when he was president, he had, for a while in 43, 44, he had persistent pneumonia and bronchitis. At least that's what they told us. He went to Bernard Baruch's place in South Carolina. He went to Warm Springs. One of the things you could do at Warm Springs, too, was what he did at Hyde Park. They had a special car for him. He his hand-driven car. They could drive around the pine forest and get away and show people around. And that was important for him at the same time. Eleanor did not go to Warm Springs a few times. It was mainly Franklin's place. And all his lady friends, his cousins, and Lucy Mercer went down there. Matter of fact, Lucy was there the day he died. We'll talk more about that next week a little bit more too. But it's his place. And people said whenever he came back from Warm Springs, he looked better. He put on a few pounds. His color was back. He was more engaged in life. He wasn't as listless sometimes as he would get. We have to understand he was very, very sick at the end of his life. He's lucky he survived to be 63 with the stuff he had going on. But he would go to Warm Springs and he would rejuvenate and be back in full strength, so to speak, by just a few days there. I think also the thing that's important about FDR and Warm Springs is this is the place that he really got to get his world shook up a little bit, and he comes to understand how important it is to just be yourself, because all his attitude and feather dusterness and patrician attitude gets taken away when he goes to Warm Springs. Because now he has people coming into Warm Springs, these fellow, as they call them, polios. And it doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter what your family background is. If you've been sick with this debilitating disease and you can't walk, you're just like anybody else in the room. You could be black, straight, gay, whatever. If you have polio, you're just like Franklin Roosevelt. And they understood that, and he understood that. And it changed, I think, his view of the world, how things work, how things operate. And I think that's absolutely amazing. When you think about this guy who's grown up in such luxury, such wealth, such privilege, to have to go there and be who you are, which is tough for him, I think. In front of a guy who's so guarded, to be human, changed his world, changed his outlook on life. I don't think if he had been elected, if he had run for president in let's say he hadn't got polio and ran in 24 or 28, he wouldn't have gotten elected. He didn't understand life before. He would have been Franklin Roosevelt, the cocky little guy from Hyde Park. He needed the polio. He needed the place like Warm Springs and the people that worked there and were part of that to help him understand what life was all about. There's a great scene in that movie, Warm Springs, where he's driven Eleanor and Louis Howe to the train station. And they're not quite convinced this is working. They're not quite convinced it's time to go. And at the other time, they look out the window of the train. Here's Franklin in his car. And other local farmers are coming. Hey, Mr. Roosevelt, how are you? He says, how's the boll weevil problem? This guy knows what the boll weevil problem is. How are the crops doing? What's going on? And he shakes hands. He still has his pince-nez glasses on and his attitude, his head cocked back, which kind of gave him that look that people thought he was kind of cocky and a jerk because his head's always back. Because he has to see through his glasses to kind of tilt his head back. That's part of what's happening there. But he shakes the hands of the farmers, of the drivers, of the railroad workers. These become his people. And Louis sees him engaging with these folks, and he looks at Eleanor. She said, do you think he's ready? And Louis says, oh, he's ready. Here's an example of that with this picture. It's the same idea. Here he is in his car. Those guys are just farmers. Those are poor Southern Appalachian struggling people. And here he is engaging them in conversation. He knows about their crops. He knows about, if he doesn't, he asks questions about it. Too many politicians nowadays would hire a consultant. You'd have a boll weevil consultant on your staff to tell you what to think and how to operate. And I think that's sad. I think FDR engaged those people at the base level, and polio helped him figure out how to do that. The other thing that happened for him was, I think it was the place he needed to go to get away. He went down there in March 1945. There's pictures of him driving his friends around a little bit in his car, being driven around in his car. Lucy Mercer's there. She brings that artist down to paint his painting. And his doctor was like, wow, he seems to be recovering. He's been diagnosed with congenital heart disease. But But a couple weeks in Warm Springs, he's got color back, like I said. He looks like he's ready to go back because the war's almost over, and he's got better things on his mind. And the biggest thing on his mind is, what's the world going to look like when he's gone, when the war's over? How do we, what are the plans? So he's thinking of the UN. He's thinking of where the country goes down the road. And it's there in April that he passes away. And Eleanor Drive takes the train down to get the body. She's there in short order. And I think it's appropriate that he dies there, in a sense. If he's going to die like that anywhere, he may as well die where he's come to understand, I think, life in all its ups and downs more than anything else. Hyde Park was important. Hyde Park taught him about things. So did Campobello. But his experiences, I think, at Warm Springs leveled his playing field, leveled his mind so much that he was really among the people there, his people. And I think it's only appropriate that that's where he passed away. And if you read the stories and look at the pictures of the train station when they brought him out of the little White House, and they're taking him to town. You know, they didn't fly him away. They took him on a train. It's not unlike Bobby Kennedy's train from New York to D.C. Hundreds of thousands of people still along the tracks from Warm Springs up to Washington. The whole town turned out. There's a beautiful, I wish they had a recording of it, but there's only still photographs of it, of the, I think it's a Navy Corpsman who played the accordion and did a wonderful rendition of that song, Going Home, that they played as they took the body out. And that's Warm Springs to me, in my mind's eye, is that last day, in a sense, that they're taking him home, back to Hyde Park. He has to go a couple other places first. But that, I think Warm Springs, it's always going to be known as the place he passed away, but I think it was more than that. It was such a, I don't know. I think that movie showed us such a good example of how he changed. I can't walk, you can't walk. We can't walk together. If we can't walk together, let's do something together anyway. And he provided such hope for people there. He was known, we said before, as Doc Roosevelt on campus. But even people that he didn't know, that he was a beacon and an inspiration for folks to come to Warm Springs. He put it on the map. The town today wouldn't exist except for him. The rehabilitation clinic is still there. It still operates. I was bummed out when I asked for brochures from people in the FDR. Hyde Park people sent me 2. The people in Warm Springs only had 1. Maybe you can copy them, they said. I'm like, I don't think I'm going to do that. But I would like to go someday to see this. I think it's an amazing place. But I think all these 3 places, Campobello, Hyde Park, Warm Springs, they each suit different parts of FDR's life. They're each important to him for different reasons. You know, the house in New York City, my mom built, they lived there, but I don't think they lived there. I don't think there's any life there. I think you go to any of these other places, you get a sense of the Roosevelts from where the location is, what's left behind. I think you really, truly appreciate them for who they were by standing. And there's something to be said about doing any of that kind of historical touring, right? Going to places that meant something to people, standing in the place. Example, I go to Boston a lot. I often stop by the old State House and the marker on the cobblestones in front that mark where the Boston Massacre occurred. It's not exactly there, but it's pretty close. I remember once going by and a bunch of college kids were like lying on the street on the cobblestone. Oh, they got a picture. Let's do a selfie. Yeah. And I walked over in one of my fits of anger and I said, excuse me, what? What's your problem? You know that 5 men died there. Really? They had no idea what they thought it was just they didn't really appreciate it. But to stand in a hollow ground like that, to go to Hyde Park, to stand at Gettysburg, where Adelbert Ames fought valiantly with his regiment. You notice I didn't say Joshua Chamberlain. But that kind of historical traveling is so important, and it's so important for you all to pass along to your kids and your grandkids. When I did my Revolutionary War class, I took the class down to Pittston to the Coburn House. Most of the folks in that class had never even heard of it, or much less have been there. And if we don't go to these places and talk about them, they'll be taken for granted and they'll go away. And then succeeding generations can't go to these places. So that's why I think it's important. Place is important. I think going to these places, I'm so glad that Will did that for us last week, Wednesday, to show us Campobello, what it was really all about, what it meant to the Roosevelts. I thought the staff did such a good job. Because I know to a person, you're all like, how can I get there? How can I get there? How do I go there? So it's a good thing for these places economically, but it's more importantly for the heart to understand the importance of place. And to say at the end of the day, you know, I have my places that I appreciate that are part of my life that I think back now and look upon wistfully. And you can go to these great historic personages, and they had those places too. They had homes that made them, places they played, places they got sick, places where people died, just like you and I. And I think it helps understand these people who walk through our history in broad sweeps. You can understand a little bit better by appreciating where they grew up, where they spent their time. And for the Roosevelts, it's Hyde Park, Campobello, and Warm Springs. So, any other questions about anything? I promise you it'll be short because Will and those guys took an hour, a little bit more of an hour on Wednesday. Gary's checking his watch. 50 minutes, my friend.
Mike, you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned how transformational having polio was for FDR. Where did that leave Eleanor? I mean, she married the patrician, but she seemed to come along with him. How did that happen?
Well, I think part of it was during the war when he was assistant secretary of the Navy. She spent time. I think they mentioned it the other day on Wednesday in working with Red Cross and working in particular with folks who had struggled. The mental health ward, these guys who had shell shock and PTSD. That opened her eyes. Did some social work as a younger lady. For her and Franklin, I think one of the things that happened was when he gets polio and his bladder doesn't function anymore. She gives him the catheter. She's the one who puts that stuff together for him. She's the one that bathes him. She's the one who takes care of him. She sleeps in the bed next to him. At the point she can't do it anymore because she's exhausted, they hire an outside nurse. But it changed her vision of suffering as well because she's now suffering herself because her husband's sick. She's having to do all this stuff. She's seeing how much he bears up under it. What are people who don't have the access to the medical professions? Who don't have the access to the care? Who don't have the access to the attention? I mean, it's not unlike one of the saddest things in the last month is there are thousands and thousands of people who have gotten this disease and they're recovering. Some people have passed away. The thing that breaks my heart is watching these people in Detroit, New York, they're just dumping bodies into mass graves now. They're forgotten. That no one knows who these people are. And that's so sad. So I think for Eleanor, she sees, wow, we have the access to all this stuff. We can do this stuff. I think part of what she does is decide, I can go and try to help figure this stuff out. I can go and be more proactive. That's my job. There's a sense of patrician responsibility. Too much is given, much is required. That's your job. But it's more than that. There's a deeply felt concern, I think, for people who are suffering because of what she's seen going on. I think it changes her life, too, to have the polio happen. It changes how you get around on a basic level, right? But the fact, you read about the stuff, she was there for him every night and every day for months after that happened. That, I think, part of what changed. Just the experience of being there for him changed how she saw things. So, anybody else? Mike, go ahead.
His experience meeting average people,
Yep.
Talking to them, did that also help in terms of him understanding how important something like Social Security would become?
Yeah, definitely, because you've got a guy who doesn't know what it's like to be wanting things, what it's like to be suffering, really. I mean, clearly he suffered his own stuff, right? But overall, if you've never had a job, hard to know what it is like to lose a job. But everything he's ever had wrong, he can come to Mama. She can even to buy Warm Springs. Mama buys it, gives him the money to help buy it. Definitely, when he sees people suffering, who go paycheck, not even paycheck to paycheck, they subsist on a few dollars a year growing crops that someone then can take and sell in the supermarket for twice and make more money, but they don't get the benefits of that. I think that's part of what gets in his head. And if you read, there's a slow progression, I think, of his understanding of politics, what politics can do, from being the vice president in this wonderful, use all this flowery language, to really be on the ground. I think that changes his whole outlook, definitely. So you have the advisors he had around him later on. We'll talk about that next week. His friends, he can build on what they're saying based on his own experience now with what. It's one thing to have somebody tell you, you should do this for the poor in this city. Oh, who are the poor? I don't know the poor. Oh, you mean people like in Georgia? Oh, yeah. Oh, gotcha. It's personal. Now it becomes an obligation that's deeply felt, I think, for him. Any other questions? Anyone? Bueller? All right. We're going to do the next 2 weeks. We're going to talk about Franklin Eleanor and his friends. We've got a lot of people to talk about. We'll talk about Eleanor's relationship with her women friends. Talk about Francis Perkins a little bit. We'll talk about people like that. And then we'll talk, a week after that, we'll talk about his enemies, because there's a lot of them. There are people who start out as his friends who end up being his enemies. Like Al Smith was his friend. Political friend, but after a while hated him. Father Coughlin. I mean, there's all sorts of people that hate Franklin Roosevelt. But it helps shape who he is as a president, because he has to learn how to outfox them, outmaneuver them, outpolitic them. And it's fascinating. Whether or not a guy with Roosevelt's background and his relationships could get elected in this day and age, I don't know, because his relationships are so complicated. When your private secretary walks between her bedroom, your bedroom, and the White House in her nightgown, that's just, if some person in the press got a hold of that nowadays, who knows what, there'd be a whole special on NBC about it or something. I mean, there'd be a docudrama about it. And then remember the 29th of April, which is a Wednesday. It's 2 weeks from this past Wednesday. Catherine Smith will be joining us from South Carolina doing her Missy LeHand. And that's going to be at 7 o'clock at night, something to do differently. She's excited about that. She showed me her outfit she's going to wear as Missy. Her plan is to do her talk, answer questions. And then if anybody wants, they're more than welcome to purchase her book. She'll sign it for you and get that to you. So looking for that. And I'll ask the Monday class about the Humphrey lecture, and we'll kind of bounce some dates around and see what people can do. No one's going anywhere, so you're all kind of captive. So I just figured there's another good opportunity to learn about somebody who found a way to put his ego aside, to do some things that are important for the country, to get some things done. And because I think, and more often than not, he was so willing to do that, he lost the one objective he always wanted. He was more willing to get things done for the right reasons, and the presidency kept getting away from him. You don't see that much anymore. So, any other questions? All right, we're going to be done here, and we will see you guys next Friday about the same time. Crockers, we'll see you a little bit later on this afternoon.
Perfect.
Good. All right. See you, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you so much.
As Gary says, be good to each other.
Yeah,
Stay well, everybody.
We're almost there.
Yep, stay safe.